The jungle held its breath, and the first scream belonged to the silence itself. Dawn had not broken, yet blood had chosen its hour. The narrator said, "Nature does not warn, it strikes." Maya padded through reed shadows, ribs tight with hunger. Nico nudged her flank, trusting a night that never promised mercy. Rake slid from the bamboo like a blade made of muscle and moonlight. Elder Kavi rumbled far off. A tremor only old bones heard. Sable watched from a strangler fig, eyes like wet embers. The narrator said, "Every heartbeat is a bargain, and the debt is due." Wind skimmed the river and carried the iron tang of fear. Leaves quivered, then froze, as if afraid to make sound before the killing started. The narrator said, "Hunger sharpens courage until it becomes a blade you cannot sheathe." Maya stepped toward the sandbar, measuring distance against the dark. Nico pressed close, soft as a shadow. A splash upstream snapped like a snare. Rake paused, tasting the wind for weakness. Sable shifted higher, claws whispering on bark. Elder Kavi turned from the river, unease tracing his spine. The narrator said, "Safety is a rumor traded by those who live past dawn." Fireflies guttered and died in the damp. The silence returned with teeth, bright and eager. The narrator said, "The river keeps secrets until it decides whom to drown." Water slithered past stones, feigning peace. Maya halted as the current revealed fresh churn marks. Nico blinked, puzzled at the scent of fear. Rake slid left, choosing cover over speed. Sable watched both tigers like a ledger adding columns. Elder Kavi rumbled again, a warning to no one and everyone. The narrator said, "Choice arrives at the slowest hour, and still you must choose now." A distant heron lifted, its wings writing the word danger. The narrator said, "Predators prey to nothing but the moment that opens." Maya shifted her weight, reading currents like scars. Nico trembled, then steadied against her warmth. Rake's tail wrote a slow, cruel promise in the grass. Sable inched along the branch, balancing chance and hunger. Elder Kavi angled away, unwilling to be witness or grave marker. The narrator said some mornings begin with a debt that cannot be shared. A thin breeze moved, and the reeds agreed to betray them. The narrator said, "When quiet breaks, bodies follow." A fish burst the surface, and everything moved. Maya leapt not for prey, but for position. Nico stumbled, then regained his small courage. Rake surged, a silent avalanche of fur and intent. Sable coiled to claim what chaos left behind. Elder Kavi trumpeted once, a cracked bell over water. The narrator said, "Law writes itself in muscle and bone." The river bent, and the jungle bowed its head to the first decision. The narrator said, "Fear stitches families from threads that should never hold." Maya led Nico along the quieter bank where roots braided like old hands. Water hummed, hiding teeth beneath its song. Nico bumped her shoulder and steadied his breath. Maya said, "Stay on my shadow." Elder Kavi paused across the bend, listening for storms that live inside bellies. He turned away, but his gaze returned to them like a tether. The narrator said, "What is fragile learns fast or breaks without ceremony." A heron traced a pale line over the river, and Maya measured hope by the wing beat. Nico stared at the print she left and tried to place his own inside it. The narrator said, "Care is a promise whispered against the roar of hunger." Maya slowed where the bank widened into driftwood and shade. She nosed a hollow, testing for snakes and sour wind. Nico waited, trying not to shiver at the memory of rushing paws. Maya said, "Smell before you move." Across the canopy, Sable watched with the patience of a coin waiting to be claimed. Leaves sighed, revealing nothing and everything. The narrator said, "Safety is borrowed, and the lender always collects." Nico settled beside the hollow, drawing courage from her warmth. Maya shaped the ground with 3 deliberate sweeps of her paw. The narrator said, "Inheritance is a map, drawn in scars." Maya marked the reed line, not for pride, but for the fragile circle around their breath. Nico sniffed, wrinkling at the bitter ink of it. He mimicked the motion and surprised himself with a small growl. Maya said, "Let the world know you are not lost." Across the water, Rake's shadow pressed against bamboo, patient as dusk. Elder Kavi felt the ground murmur and shifted his stance. The narrator said, "Lessons arrive with a bill, and sometimes the bill has claws." Nico lifted his head, taller by an inch of resolve. Maya stood beside him, a wall that would not pretend to be stone. The narrator said, "Love is risk spent in advance." Maya guided Nico to a fallen log silvered by rot and sunless damp. She pressed her paw along the grain and showed where beetles meant easy food. Nico nibbled, surprised by the sting of bitter shells. Maya said, "Eat the small things before they become your small end." Sable shifted to a deeper branch, reading the two tigers like a text she intended to annotate later. Elder Kavi exhaled a soft thunder and turned toward thicker forest. The narrator said, "What survives today teaches tomorrow, if tomorrow arrives." Nico licked his whiskers and tried again, slower. The narrator said, "Hope is heaviest when it belongs to two." Clouds thinned and the river brightened enough to show paths and traps. Maya tested the crossing again, remembering every stone that shifted beneath her weight. Nico mirrored her stride, clumsy but brave. Maya said, "Step where I step." Rake waited, letting patience sharpen need into purpose. Elder Kavi paused at the forest's lip, unwilling to abandon small lives to a large silence. The narrator said, "Care does not cancel danger. It only teaches timing." Maya let out, and Nico followed, a heartbeat behind, a promise inside a footprint. The narrator said, "The jungle turns hostile when silence thickens into intent." Maya padded along the river's curve, her ribs showing more hunger than strength. Nico staggered at her side, his paws sinking into mud that remembered predators. Rake's shadow lengthened with every breath, his patience sharpened into a blade. Sable's eyes burned above, waiting for weakness to tear from opportunity. Elder Kavi trumpeted once, a broken sound of warning. Maya said, "Keep close. The ground speaks louder than the air." Nico swallowed fear, eyes darting from reeds to water. The narrator said, "Every path now narrows to one, and it is carved with claws." The narrator said, "Hunger breeds mistakes, and mistakes are mortal." Maya tested the air, muscles taut. Nico leaned into her, breath shallow, eyes darting to the trees. Rake circled wider, dragging silence with him. Sable slid to another branch, tail coiling with precision. Elder Kavi rumbled low, but the sound was swallowed by wind. Maya said, "Move with my pace, never ahead." Nico whispered with his paws. "Steps unsteady but loyal," the narrator said. "The ground shifts not by accident but by design, and danger knows where it will crack." The narrator said, "Storms do not need clouds to break lives." The jungle hushed before the ambush. Maya froze, paw lifted. Nico stopped, ears twitching to echoes only he feared. Rake lunged from bamboo, teeth bared, earth exploding beneath him. Sable tensed, coiled to descend into chaos. Elder Kavi turned sharply, tusks angled in warning. Maya said, "Back!" "Nico!" Her growl tore the silence like a blade. The narrator said, "Conflict has no language but the rush of breath and the crack of bone." The narrator said, "Survival is written in scars before they exist." Maya blocked Nico, claws tearing the mud, a wall of defiance. Rake crashed forward, rage carved in muscle and hunger. Sable shifted, calculating the moment to strike what remained. Elder Kavi roared, his trunk swinging, the sound cracking the air like thunder. Maya said, "Do not run. Face him." Nico trembled but stayed, his paws digging into soil. The narrator said, "Conflict is unfair by design, and yet It must be faced with fire. The narrator said, "Every clash leaves more than wounds. It leaves decisions." Maya sprang sideways, striking at Rake's flank with desperate force. Nico darted behind roots, trembling but watching. Rake twisted, claws raking earth as fury grew. Sable's eyes narrowed, waiting for her share. Elder Cavi advanced, tusks angled, his mass commanding even the wind. Maya said, "Stay hidden. Live for the next breath." The narrator said, "Conflict crescendos where fear and courage meet, and only one is remembered by dawn." The narrator said, "What you believe is survival's law may only be its disguise." Maya pressed against Nico, her chest heaving from the clash. Rake halted, but not in weakness. His eyes burned with a truth older than rivalry. He rumbled deep, not at her, but at the shadows beyond. Sable froze, her hunger checked by something heavier. Elder Cavi's ears flared, trunk stiff, as the ground whispered of more than tigers. Maya said, "Why do you wait?" Nico blinked, confused at a predator's hesitation. The narrator said, "Every enemy carries a story, and sometimes it is the same story written twice." The narrator said, "Predators do not pause unless the world itself interrupts." Rake growled low, not at Maya but toward the reeds where another scent bled into air. Sable narrowed her eyes, confusion silencing her hunger. Maya shifted her stance, uncertain whether to fight or flee. Nico pressed to her chest, trembling as his whiskers caught the wind of danger not yet seen. Elder Cavi trumpeted, not to warn, but to answer a question the jungle itself had asked. Maya said, "Something else hunts here." The narrator said, "Every truth is layered, and sometimes the deepest cut is not from the teeth you see." The narrator said, "The jungle never keeps only one secret." A crocodile broke the surface, armored body cutting through the river like a blade. Maya snarled, realizing the river she had trusted betrayed her. Nico cried a small growl, his courage outweighed by the scale of teeth. Rake snarled in kind, but it was warning, not challenge. Elder Cavi bellowed, the sound splitting dawn in two. Sable steadied, weighing her choices. Maya said, "Back from the water." The narrator said, "Sometimes the rival you fear is the ally you need, for survival does not honor pride." The narrator said, "Truth often shatters what you thought you feared." The crocodile lunged again, water flashing silver. Maya leapt back, pulling Nico with her. Rake struck the mud near its head, claws carving the bank to hold ground. Elder Cavi stomped, sending tremors into the riverbed. Sable growled low, not for prey, but for the changing balance. Maya said, "Even rivals bleed beside us now." Nico pressed under her, trembling but watching Rake's defiance. The narrator said, "The twist of survival is not who wins, but who endures together when the larger shadow arrives." The narrator said, "Revelation is not mercy. It is a harsher truth." The crocodile sank back, leaving ripples like scars across the water. Maya's breath cut sharp, guarding Nico close. Rake remained planted, chest rising heavy but unbroken. Sable lowered herself, the hunger in her gaze blurred with caution. Elder Cavi turned, his tusks gleaming, his eyes reflecting both pity and promise. Maya said, "We are not the only hunters, nor the only prey." The narrator said, "The jungle has no single enemy. Its truth is a circle that swallows even the strongest." The narrator said, "Climax is not the peak of choice, but the break of inevitability." Dawn cracked wider, and the jungle exhaled with the sound of blood waiting. Maya pressed forward, her muscles quivering from hunger yet blazing with defiance. Nico crouched behind her, his tiny chest rattling in the air thick with death. Rake stalked closer, no longer a rival, but a shadow fused with hers. Sable's claws dug into bark as her hunger twisted into decision. Elder Cavi surged, tusks lowered, his voice shattering branches like brittle bones. Maya said, "Hold. Survive." The narrator said the moment bends, and survival's edge slices all that stands before it. The narrator said, the clash comes not in whispers but in the roar that leaves no room for air. The crocodile burst from the river again, jaws snapping with violence older than time. Maya leapt sideways, claws raking mud, dragging Nico away from the strike. Rake lunged at the beast's flank, fangs tearing against armored hide, fury spilling with blood. Elder Kavi crashed into the water's edge, tusks slamming waves into thunder. Sable tensed, ready to descend where opportunity bled. Maya said, now. Her roar split the dawn. The narrator said in the storm of survival, no creature stands apart. All are dragged into its teeth. The narrator said, struggle writes itself in broken breath and flying dust. The crocodile twisted, tail lashing, sending Rake sprawling into reeds. Maya lunged at its jaw, claws seeking soft flesh between scales. Nico shrieked a tiny growl, his defiance sharp despite his fear. Elder Kavi pressed forward, tusks tearing water into violent arcs. Sable dropped halfway, tail whipping as she weighed her strike. Rake roared back, mud sliding down his scarred shoulders. Maya said, fight with everything, even what breaks. The narrator said, this is the peak, the marrow of survival, where endings choose their shape. The narrator said, every climax demands sacrifice, for balance will not tip freely. Maya slashed deep, blood staining the river. Rake struck from the other side, teeth locked into flesh, his body straining against the beast. The crocodile thrashed, jaws snapping inches from Maya's throat. Nico darted behind roots, eyes wide, his world trembling with each impact. Elder Kavi trumpeted, his tusks gouging the ground as waves crashed outward. Sable descended, claws unsheathed, eyes glinting with hunger and hesitation. Maya said, stand, or the river will claim us all. The narrator said, the storm peaks, and its roar is louder than time itself. The narrator said, the climax resolves only in the silence that follows screams. With one final heave, Maya and Rake tore the crocodile away from the bank. It thrashed once, then sank, blood ribbons vanishing beneath currents. Maya collapsed to her knees, chest burning, eyes fixed on Nico's trembling shape. Rake staggered, his body marked in crimson and mud, but standing. Elder Kavi exhaled, his rumble low, mourning and proud. Sable stilled. Hunger dulled by exhaustion, gaze lingering on the broken ground. Maya said, breathe, you are alive. The narrator said, in the marrow of struggle, survival itself is the only victory. The narrator said, resolution is never gentle. It lands like the weight of inevitability. The river calmed, swallowing blood as if it had never been spilt. Maya lowered her body, her muscles quaking, yet her eyes fixed on Nico, alive and trembling. Rake staggered, his flanks torn, yet he stood upright, unwilling to collapse. Elder Kavi exhaled, his rumble fading into the mist. Sable perched above, hunger unspent but dulled by the exhaustion of the night. Maya said, the sun rises, but not all rise with it. The narrator said, nature is not kind, nor cruel. It is only absolute. The narrator said, the river's silence is heavier than its roar. Maya rose slowly, pulling Nico against her, each step a vow carved into mud. Rake limped along the bank, his head low, his breath a growl of survival. Sable curled back into shadow, unwilling to waste strength on prey that endured. Elder Kavi turned toward the forest, his tusks gleaming with sorrow. Maya said, come, before the silence takes more than it returns. Nico blinked, his paws leaving prints inside hers, smaller, fragile, but determined. The narrator said, resolution is not victory. It is breath granted by chance. The narrator said, every survivor carries the weight of those who did not. Maya paused near reeds, her ears twitching at the faint cry of unseen creatures. Nico pressed beneath her, comforted by warmth more than safety. Rake sank into mud for a moment, his body refusing to continue, his eyes dim yet unyielding. Elder Kavi raised his trunk once, honoring life that still moved. Sable descended slowly, her paws whispering on bark, though her claws remained sheathed. Maya said, "The path is not done, but it belongs to us," the narrator said. "Resolution is the echo of struggle, not its end." The narrator said, "Peace returns not as gift, but as reminder of what was taken." Maya guided Nico toward the tree line where shadows promised refuge. Nico stumbled, yet rose, his small body refusing to falter. Rake dragged himself after them, a broken echo of strength, unwilling to yield. Elder Kavi stepped aside, watching their passage with ancient eyes. Sable clung to the edge of the canopy, fading into stillness. Maya said, "Keep moving. Every step writes survival." The narrator said, "The storm has passed, but the ground keeps its memory." The narrator said, "Resolution does not erase, it engraves." The river bent away, carrying secrets in silence while the forest waited with its own hungers. Maya stopped at the edge of shadow. Nico pressed at her side, their breathing bound together. Rake collapsed, his strength finally gone, but his eyes still open. Elder Kavi turned, fading into distance, his rumble fading like thunder too far away to follow. Sable vanished into the canopy, her hunger postponed but never lost. Maya said, "We have breath. That is enough," the narrator said. And so the circle closes, not with mercy but with survival. The narrator said, "The jungle does not applaud survival. It merely witnesses." The river stilled, its surface smooth as unbroken glass. Maya stood at the tree line, her body trembling but unbowed. Nico pressed into her, his heartbeat fluttering beneath fur too young for scars. Rake lay behind them, his sides rising shallow, eyes still burning with unspent fire. Elder Kavi's silhouette faded into mist, a monument of silence walking away. Sable's eyes gleamed once from the canopy, then vanished. Maya said, "We walk forward." The narrator said, "The echo begins when the world pretends nothing happened, though everything has changed." The narrator said, "Survival's echo is heard in silence louder than roars." Maya stepped into the trees, her paws careful on roots damp with night's memory. Nico followed, every step a defiance of fate. Rake's breathing slowed, the jungle drawing him closer to the soil. Elder Kavi's absence pressed like a weight where strength once stood. Sable prowled deeper into shadow, her hunger postponed but eternal. Maya said, "The path belongs to those who breathe." The narrator said, "The jungle keeps no record but prints in mud, and even they wash away." The narrator said, "Echoes linger when voices cannot." Maya halted at a clearing where sunlight broke in columns of fire. Nico lifted his head, his whiskers lit by gold, his eyes wide with awe. Rake's roar never came, the silence claiming his body as the river once claimed blood. Elder Kavi's rumble was gone, but the ground still remembered. Sable paused, her gaze following, her hunger speaking where words never did. Maya said, "Look, light returns." The narrator said, in the echo of survival, "Even innocence wears the weight of loss." The narrator said, "Echoes carve themselves deepest in those who must carry them." Maya nudged Nico forward, her head bowed to the weight of what was lost. Nico glanced back once, eyes lingering on Rake's body, then turned. Elder Kavi's path was gone, dissolved into forest fog. Sable curled back into her branch, her hunger patient as time itself. Maya said, "Do not look back. Breath belongs ahead." The narrator said, "The echo does not fade. It waits, binding the living to the memory of survival." The narrator said, and at the last, silence becomes the echo that endures. Maya stood at the forest's edge. Nico pressed against her, both bathed in the first true light of dawn. The air carried no growls, no trumpets, no splash of teeth. Rake was gone to stillness, Elder Cavi to distance, Sable to shadow. Only breath remained, fragile but defiant. Maya said, "We remain." The narrator said, "The jungle falls quiet before sunrise, because danger has already woken first, and what lingers is the echo, eternal, haunting, unforgettable."